was a broiling afternoon in Los Angeles when aspiring screenwriter Mumsy Scrimshaw slipped into the back of the theater and downed a quarter of an edible gummy with a chaser of Dr. Pepper.
I didn't know anything about it. It was just the next film starting when I walked into the box office. I'd just been fired off a set. I needed a cool, dark hole to crawl into. But what I found was transformational. Sitting there alone in that theater, it radically changed the direction of my life. But you know, little did I know there would be so many parallels to my own struggles.
Scrimshaw stepped out of Jodorowsky's Dune and onto a winding path that would take him to the blacklist and through the Hollywood machine, where he watched as line by line his script of Theseus was transformed by the dark arts of Hollywood, much like how Dr. Michael Morbius was transformed into the living vampire.
He was such an important figure, and I just never heard about him. You hear a lot about Geiger because of the dicks, but Jean Giraud, never. And I really wanted to change that.
Scrimshaw would spend the next 2 years immersing himself in the oeuvre of Morbius, the French artist who inspires creators ranging from Fellini to Miyazaki, and whose concepts would build the worlds of so many science fiction and fantasy authors, from William Gibson to George Lucas and Ridley Scott. What came out of the process was Morbius Strip, a fictionalized biography and documentary based on the man and the many worlds he had created.
My passion for the project was a little infectious, and I think that opened a lot of doors. Of course, the earlier documentary was a cult hit by then and paved a lot of the way for telling stories about figures like Morbius and Geiger.
Over the next year, drafts for Morbius Strip were circulated around Hollywood and even earned a spot on the prestigious Hollywood blacklist. That helped Scrimshaw land representation and a deal with Sony Pictures Classics. However, issues with the estate would prove almost insurmountable to the project, until one executive came back from a bathroom after a lunch meeting.
Asked me, okay, but isn't he supposed to be a vampire? He was really excited about it and he wouldn't stop talking about it. It was a really confusing meeting. I felt like we were talking about two completely different projects.
Scrimshaw tried to stay close to the project during pre-production, but meetings gradually became almost incomprehensible to him. Step by step, the quiet, contemplative celebration of a pioneering fantasy illustrator became the story of a tormented scientist, driven by his hubris to experiment with the boundaries of life and death. The final blow for Scrimshaw came in early 2018, just prior to the start of principal filming.
And I gotta admit that there were probably some signs that I should have seen early on in the process. But I was just so excited that my dream was coming true and I was finally part of a major motion picture. So you ignore when the studio people call and they keep adding an R to the title, or that they focus on Marvel, and that was such a small part of Giraud's career. The vampire stuff was a little harder to swallow, but it was my first job, and who am I to say that the movie doesn't need a vampire? I always knew that there was something wrong, and that made it hard to stay focused and excited on the movie. So when Marty called me and told me the news, I was actually a little relieved, especially once that last check cleared.
Little remains of Scrimshaw's original Morbius treatment, but his story is emblematic of the chaotic and troubled production that's dominating the box office this April.